Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Cool. All right. So we're going to be talking about heart and lungs today. Again, I mentioned we talked a little bit about the heart before. And I think most of you guys know what the basic functions of the heart and lungs are. So we won't belabor those too much, but just so we have a basic understanding of the anatomy and some of the physiology. And then both of these organ systems and actually many others are affected by the COVID infection. And there was some interest last week in talking more about the coronavirus, and we'll try to get enough basic information here that we can talk about it next time. So if asked to name organs in the chest, most of you guys could probably name the heart and lungs. There are some others, and some of them are more important than others for adults, but here's a basic anatomic image. I think you guys are pretty familiar with the layout of how the heart and lungs are related. So obviously the heart is in the center, the lungs surround it. There's vessels coming off of the heart, but there's a lot of other things in the chest as well. We can also see the thymus in this previous image. Actually, you can see that kind of gross yellow looking thing. The thymus is not important unless you're Celeste. But Celeste studies some of the cells that are inhabitants of the thymus at different points. So these are T cells from the immune system, are generally associated with the thymus. She can correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a long time since I thought about immunology.
Open the thymus.
The trachea also you could put in the chest. The esophagus is not shown in this image, but that's the tube that food travels down to the stomach. And one other thing to notice is that there's these structures called pleura in the chest. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but you can see underneath the lung that sort of white sheet-looking structure. And also in this previous image, you can see a sheet covering the heart. And so these are pleural structures, and what they tend to do is cover organs and allow for motion of organs, especially the lungs, which expand and contract considerably. It allows less friction to happen when the lungs are moving, especially, and the heart also, which moves quite a bit. Any questions so far? I can't see the chat, so interrupt me if someone says something there.
I will.
Okay. So let's do a quick review of the heart. There are 4 chambers in the heart. I think we went over this before we disbanded, but the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. So 2 atria and 2 ventricles. And you can see here that the atria tend to be higher on the heart and the ventricles tend to be lower. The coordinate system of the heart that we tend to talk about is basal, which is closer to the great vessels or the atria, and apical, which is closer to the pointy part of the heart. There's also 2 great vessels that come off of the heart, and you can see them here. In blue towards the center of the diagram is the pulmonary artery, and in red is the aorta. So the pulmonary artery, as the name suggests, takes blood to the lungs, and the aorta takes blood to the body. Just like we have 4 chambers in our heart, we also have 4 valves in the heart. And we can use this to review the path of blood through the heart. So blood returns from the body in the vena cava, which is this big blue vein on the left side of this diagram. That goes vertically. So it returns, and the structure it returns to is actually the right atrium. So I made a mistake there. Wow, I made a lot of mistakes here. Sorry. Let's fix that, because I can. Right atrium. I'll get in trouble at work for that. All right, I think it's correct now. So blood comes back from the body to the right atrium and then passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. So this is deoxygenated blood that's come back from the body. It's then returned to the lungs through the pulmonary artery to become oxygenated blood. It returns to the left atrium through the pulmonary veins. There's 4 of those. And then it goes through the mitral valve into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle is responsible for pumping that blood to the body. You can see there's a lot of 4s in the heart, 4 chambers, 4 valves, and 4 pulmonary veins. Oh, and Celeste has put a GIF in here, so you can see that.
I like it.
Animations. See, I'm even surprising myself with the slides. That's good. All right. So that's all I wanted to cover on the heart. Just a quick review of what the heart is like. I think you guys can remember, I think you guys probably knew most of that already, so let's get through it real quick. But the main topic for today, we were hoping to talk about the respiratory system. And the respiratory system obviously is useful for gas exchange. And that's the primary function. So that's exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen with the environment so that we can survive. There's some other functions though that maybe are less prominent or you wouldn't think of. So phonation is an important one, and that's making noise, so speaking like I'm doing now. Olfaction is another function of the respiratory system, so that's smelling things. It also participates in pH regulation and also thermal regulation. The lungs have a really large surface area, and you're taking in air at room temperature, so that helps to bring your core temperature down. So we can see all of the pipes basically of the respiratory system in this diagram, and we'll talk more about those in a couple seconds. So getting the air to the lungs goes through the large airways. And you can see those here. The nose and mouth are obviously the intake points, you guys know that. The air then passes through the pharynx, into the trachea, and then into the lungs. And the vocal cords are located at the superior aspect of the trachea. So that's near the top of the trachea. All right, gross anatomy of the lungs. So the left lung has 2 lobes, and the right lung has 3 lobes. I was going to ask a question, but I'm not expecting too many answers. But you guys can surprise me if you want. So if aspiration occurs, so if I swallow something, which lung? It's supposed to end up. It would generally end up in the right lung. Does anyone have an idea why? No. All right, I'll just tell you then. If you actually look at the shape of the trachea and then the main stem bronchus, which is the first splitting there, the right lung has a steeper angle, and so it's more likely to go into that lung. Does anyone want to guess why there are only 2 lobes of the left lung and 3 of the right lung? Okay, well, the heart has to fit in, and the heart is on the left side.
Oh, someone answered. Maybe
Oh,
for the
wow.
heart, question mark.
Great. I can't see who it was, but congratulations, that's the correct answer.
If you're
This is
unmuted.
thought to be the correct answer. I don't know if there's definitive motives for this. It's just how it ended up. But the reason is that there is a heart there, and you've seen that in some of the earlier slides. And so this structure actually leads to some of the ways that you're examined if you go to the doctor's office. And I'm sure most of you guys have had your lungs listened to in the doctor's office, where they ask you to take a deep breath in and deep breath out. And this structure is why doctors listen in the pattern that they do. So we use a side-to-side comparison to compare between similar regions on each side. We expect it to sound relatively symmetrical. And then we use many different points because we try to hit each lung lobe so that we're listening to each lobe independently. And that can be helpful if you have a disease that affects only one lobe. We don't want to miss it because we're listening to only, we're not listening to that lobe. All right. the lungs, as you can imagine, as you can guess from just the very basic structure of the lungs, a lot of things in the body work like this, where they branch from one vessel into two, and then from two into four, and they increase exponentially like that. So airways in the lung do exactly the same thing. And they branch repeatedly into smaller and smaller vessels. And I think somebody has actually quantified how many times they split in a normal human, but I don't remember what the number is. But gas exchange actually only occurs in the very smallest parts of the airways. So this gives rise to the name conducting airways for some of the larger airways, where their only function with breathing is to bring air to the smallest parts of the lung, where the actual gas exchange can take place. Did I draw on my screen? That's weird. Okay. And so, as we mentioned, gas exchange is the major function of the lung, as you guys already probably knew. And this occurs, again, in the smallest branches. And at the ends of the smallest branches are structures called alveoli. And these are these kind of white spherical structures that you see in this diagram. And these are surrounded by capillaries, which are the smallest blood vessels. And they generally only have one cell thickness of their walls. So since the walls are so thin on both the alveoli, and as you'll see later, and the capillaries, gas can actually exchange via diffusion across these barriers. And this allows the gas exchange, other than the requirement for pumping blood from the heart, to be passive. So we can just do it. We don't have to spend any energy to move the carbon dioxide out and the oxygen into the blood. It occurs because there's a lower concentration of oxygen in the blood and a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood than the atmosphere. And one more structure on the lungs. The lungs don't have a huge number of complicated structures that you need to know about, but the hilum is one important one. And essentially, this is the hub where all of the inlets and outlets of the lungs are. They tend to be relatively sealed up, except for at this point. And there's a lot of things that go into the lungs and come out of the lungs, obviously blood and air. And this occurs, blood goes in through arteries and comes out through veins. The air goes in and out the same tubes, and that's the bronchus, or the bronchi. But the lungs are also innervated, so they have nerves coming in and out. And there's other structures such as lymphatic vessels that go in and out of the lungs here. So you don't need to know anything about this structure other than that it exists, really. So breathing, you guys probably don't think about it much, which is kind of nice. It's a good example of a skill that you, or a movement, a motion that you can have occur automatically without you thinking about it. But you can also take voluntary control of it. It was really obvious in the lungs. You can hold your breath. So there's other skeletal muscles like this, and most skeletal muscles will act like this. Think about walking. You don't have to think about moving your individual muscles, but it's a coordinated motion that's automatically done for you. So the question here that I was going to ask is, inhaling or exhaling an active process?
So this question is a little bit about that you only have your body only has to actively inhale or actively exhale. You don't actively do both.
Correct.
So which half of the breathing cycle is active? It's a 50-50 shot, guys. Ethan says inhalation is active.
Yeah, that's correct. And you can see that in this image here. As the diaphragm contracts downwards, so muscle contraction requires energy, and only breathing in takes energy. Generally, breathing out is passive in our bodies. And then we've talked about it before when we were in person. Does anyone remember how many breaths per minute is considered normal?
12 to 20.
Nice. Okay. Perfect. Well, at least one person remembers. That's great. All right. We'll move into a little bit more about the cells of the lung, and we'll talk a little bit more about these next week or whenever we end up talking about COVID. There's obviously a lot of different cells that are in the lung. We're going to talk about three that primarily occur in the alveoli, and they're the primary cells that are found there. So two of them are actual lung cells, and those are type 1 and type 2 pneumocytes. And then we also have alveolar macrophages, which are immune cells. So the type 1 pneumocytes are large and flat, and these form nearly all of the surface area of the alveoli. And these are the thin cells that allow gas to exchange across them. Type 2 pneumocytes, they make an important compound called surfactant, and they form a very small percentage of the lung surface area. But they're really important both for forming the surfactant and also for making, so they differentiate into new type 1 cells. And then alveolar macrophages take up kind of things that shouldn't be in the lungs. So this is inhaled particles and other microbes that get into your lungs. And so they're important for the immune response. And you can see a diagram up here on the right side. It shows these type 1 cells as these kind of darker blue cells that are forming up the major surface area of the lung. And then it shows these kind of jellyfish looking cells as the type 2 pneumocytes. It actually doesn't show any of the macrophages. It shows a different cell type called fibroblasts, which we don't need to talk about. And then the red cells here are cells, endothelial cells that line capillaries. And so you can see here in this diagram from the open area in the center of one alveola, which is between that kind of open circle in the middle, to get into the capillary where you see those nice red blood cells, is only across two very thin layers of cells. The last thing about these, surfactant is an interesting compound. It's basically like soap, and it allows the lungs to move freely. So it basically lubricates the lungs. Otherwise, you'd have a really hard time breathing. And sometimes this is given to very, very young infants artificially. People who are born very, very early, or babies that are born very, very early, sometimes don't make enough surfactant by themselves and can't breathe by themselves without giving them surfactant of their own. I don't think I'm even going to ask what process the alveolar macrophages use to take up particles. I'll just tell you it's called phagocytosis, and this is where they kind of ingest these particles and bring them into their own cell membranes. You guys may not have looked at pictures like this before, but this is what lung cells look like under a microscope, and this is kind of a histological or histology slide. And you can see that these type 1 pneumocytes, so that really thin pink line that's shown, are extremely thin, and even more so than this drawing that we saw, and that some of these type 2 pneumocytes are still pretty small, but not nearly as thin as the type 1 pneumocytes. And so these cells are stained, making them easier to see with visible light. And you can kind of imagine that these cells are very, very thin in one dimension and very, very flat, long cells in the other dimension. So imagine slicing a pancake or a crepe and then looking at it on edge. You'd see a very thin layer, but the actual surface area of that cell is quite large. Yeah, more of lung histology. So this is looking at other cells in the lung. These are the alveolar macrophages. The question I was going to ask is, well, two questions. One is, why would these cells appear black? So what's the black substance? And then two, in what kind of patient would we expect these black cells to be especially widespread? Oh, wait, just a second.
Smokers. That's the answer
Good.
that we're seeing.
That is the correct answer, or one of the correct answers. Good. So you've probably heard that smoking damages the lungs, and these macrophages will take up particles that are inhaled during smoking. This is tar and other carbon compounds. And then actually, if we looked at all of our lungs, we would probably have similar deposits in a lesser amounts because of pollution in the cities. And we all, of course, right now live in a city. So another population at risk are coal miners. And so I put a reference to an old movie that none of you guys have probably heard of or seen. If you have, that makes me happy. So yeah, coal miners, especially if you look at their lungs, are basically entirely black. On the right side here is a picture of a smoker's lung and a healthy lung. So the healthy lung is obviously the pink lung. There is a video, but I don't know if I can pull it up right now. But basically, this nurse tries to inflate both of the lungs and shows that they're considerably different. As you'd expect, this lung looks pretty unhealthy. You don't expect anything coming out of your body to be that disease looking. All right, that's all I had on lungs. Didn't want to go too long. Does anyone have any questions on lungs? Or hearts or anything else? All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
If everyone can see the chat, it's on the side. So if anyone has any questions about lungs or any specific things, or questions about doctor studies lungs, things like that, you could type it right into the chat on this side.
Yeah, so we have a question about do any of you guys want to answer the question? I've been talking for like half an hour. I'm happy to answer it.
Go ahead, Mike.
All right, yay. All right, so then we have a question. So is the black stuff in the lungs smoke, or is it some kind of chemical in coal or cigarettes? I think it's a little hard to distinguish exactly what it is. When you light a cigarette and you inhale it, you're inhaling thousands of compounds. So there's some tar and some other carbon-based compounds in there as well. So I don't think that it's one particular substance. I think it's a complicated amalgam of a lot of different substances. I think anytime you're inhaling something that you're burning, so you're just inhaling smoke. So it is the components of the smoke, but it is no longer smoke, I guess. I don't know. I think it's a hard question to answer, but yeah, so these are chemicals that come from the cigarettes. And again, we all will have these kind of deposits in lesser amounts because we're inhaling pollution on a regular basis. We all live in cities. There's lots of cars and air conditions and all sorts of other stuff running. So we do have these kind of deposits.
Or if you smoke anything that isn't cigarettes, anytime that you're inhaling a combustion
Sure.
product.
Yeah, cigarettes are the kind of the poster child for things that you shouldn't be putting in your lungs. But anything you're inhaling that's burning or has been vaporized is potentially bad for your lungs. I think there's still room for evidence on vaping. But I think the general consensus among healthcare providers that it's probably not the best thing for your lungs.
For the second question, I think this is what the video was about. So does it only turn black, or how does it affect the lungs? It doesn't only turn black. They get really stiff.
I'm going to try to pull up the video. I guess I can
They
do that.
lose what's called compliance. So like normal healthy lungs can really stretch like balloons and then go back, and they have a big sort of range of how full they can be of air. And lungs that are really damaged like that don't. They lose that elasticity. So that's one big thing. And then another thing is that surfactant that we were talking about, is useful for lubricating the lungs, but if they get filled with mucus and other other things, that can be a really big issue. So something that happens a lot with smokers is that their lungs start filling with mucus, and that's inflammation from the irritation of all the gunk there. And so instead of it being that nice open bubble filled with air, it's filled with like just inflammatory debris mostly. And so if you've ever heard of someone with emphysema or someone who coughs up a lot of gross mucus who was a long-term smoker, that's why.
Yeah, I can try to pull up that video if you guys want to see it. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but it may not be a huge loss. Let's see.
Can you guys think of ways that we would measure lung function? Like, how do we figure out whether a lung's working normally or not without like opening someone up and checking if it's black? So what's the function of your lung? It's inhalation and exhalation, right? So is there any way that we can spirometry?
Wow.
Nice. Love it. So you can measure the volume, the maximal volume that your lungs can inhale and exhale with each breath. So that's like a quick diagnostic that we can use to see if there's something going wrong there. What about things other than smoking? Can you guys think of other things that might affect? Actually, with spirometry, let's see if I can find like a picture of a spirometer.
You can think of spirometry kind of like blowing up a balloon, though.
Yeah.
Ventilator. I was going to explain ventilators next week, but we can talk about it today if we want. But yeah, you can think of spirometry like blowing up a balloon. So you can think of if you had really healthy lungs, you might be able to blow up the balloon quite quickly and blow up the balloon to a reasonably large volume. And if your lungs aren't working that well, it may take you a really long time to blow it up, and you may not be able to blow it up all the way.
Do we want to talk about ventilators or?
I can talk about ventilators either way. Yeah, I mean, the ventilators are kind of like you hear a lot about them and how expensive they are, and there's good reason why ventilators are quite expensive, because you don't want to like rupture a patient's lungs by putting too much air into them. But you can think of a ventilator as just a really fancy way to inflate and deflate lungs. And what happens is patients have a tube placed down their throat. So patients on a ventilator are all sedated so that they're not fully awake. And this allows them to have a tube down their throat without gagging it up, essentially. Otherwise, none of you would let us stick a tube down your throat into your lungs. Yeah, so it's not pleasant. And essentially, once you have a tube in the lungs, you have pretty full control of how much air comes in and out of the lungs. So the patient is no longer breathing on their own. And the machine breathes for them. So it's just a fancy way to breathe for patients that gives doctors full control of how they're breathing. So we can prescribe how often they're breathing and the volume that they're breathing in and out. And it also allows for delivering 100% oxygen, which is really important for some of these patients who have compromised lungs. You can imagine for your lungs, nearly all of your lung is available for gas exchange. And so you have quite a large surface area that can exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. But if your lungs are full of fluid, that part of your lung does not help with gas exchange. And so using a really high fraction of oxygen in the air you're breathing really helps. And if you remember from chemistry or physics, diffusion is most effective when the gradient is the highest. So when you have a lot of oxygen in the air inside your lung and very little oxygen in the blood, the diffusion is very effective. But if you have very little oxygen in your lung and very little oxygen in your blood, they're not going to exchange oxygen. So typically the goal here is to give patients enough oxygen to get through the worst part of the disease. And this works for many diseases, not just COVID, but COVID has really brought it into the limelight. But the goal is to support the patient with mechanical breathing while their body and maybe any other treatments that you have manage to fight off the disease, and then they can recover afterwards. But there's a lot of other complicated things that ventilators do. For instance, if you just give pure oxygen, you dry the lungs out really fast. So you have to give some amount of liquid. Otherwise, you'll overwhelm the surfactant capabilities of the lungs, especially if they're compromised by disease. Oh man.
Oh my God. Why do you need to know?
Well, we could talk about the different measurements, but essentially the SpO2 is the peripheral oxygen level. And that's what you'd measure with a pulse oximeter. So that's that little thing that you put on your finger. And you may have seen it in the doctor where they put like a little clamp on your finger with a little red light, and that measures the peripheral oxygen levels in the blood. The
I think
SaO2
phones
is
have them now sometimes too.
I have an iPhone 6, so it doesn't have that.
Asian phones. Like
Asian phones?
Samsung. Yeah. You know, good phones.
Okay, I'm aware. The SaO2 is
Arterial.
arterial, and that's what you're going to have coming off of the lung. Essentially, the percentage of oxygen in that, or the amount of oxygen in that blood. What else do we want? Sorry.
And the PaO2 is the plasma concentration.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
But the SpO2 is the one that you see if like on a medical show when they say the patient's sat, that's the like oxygen saturation in the capillaries, which like Mike has said is measured by a little laser.
Yeah, it's much easier to measure than the SaO2.
For the next question, lung replacement is
Lung replacement.
it's it's you can do a complete tissue replacement, but it's really hard obviously because you have to get the new lung from somewhere. We don't have a synthetic version in any way, so it's a complete organ transplant. And for patients that need it, it's really hard to get. So a lot of our job as doctors is to try and prevent people from getting to that point or to attenuate the symptoms until they can get a transplant. But yeah, theoretically you can transplant lungs. It's just that the source of those lungs can be hard to find.
Another thing that you might think about, at least in like this day and age with COVID, is that like for lung replacement, you could do a transplant, but you would probably never do that with someone that has an infection because you have to suppress their immune system so it doesn't attack the new lung. So it's like a option, but it probably would never be used in an infectious setting. The one that you might hear about being used is there's also this thing called ECMO, pretty much like bypasses, and you can oxygenate liquid directly. It's pretty advanced, and it's only for someone that is they think will get better. But I think it's like a mechanical heart almost, but it takes the blood out of the patient and then it like oxygenates it directly, I believe, and then puts it back in. So that's a temporary option. You can't live long term on it.
Yeah, and just to answer the last question that's been entered, you
Right,
can do
that
just
we
a
have
lung
one-
transplant.
We're missing. Oh yeah, we can do that.
Sorry,
But
that was
then,
related. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can just do the lungs. You can also just do one lung.
And you can also
Um,
live without one lung.
Yeah.
They used to remove in people who had really bad lung cancer on one side. I haven't heard of it recently, but they used to remove like one lung if you had disease in one lung, but the other lung was fine. And there's a really famous anti-smoking ad about a guy who was kind of making fun of the cowboys they used to use for advertising, and he would just say, "I miss my lung," so it can be done.
So if a patient has pneumonia, how is the liquid in the lungs removed? Most of the time, we treat the underlying cause of the pneumonia, which is usually bacterial ultimately, so antibiotics. And as the patient gets better, all that sort of inflammatory debris and gunk will clear on its own. That's the ideal solution.
And that's clearing through the lymphatic vessels generally. You can also breathe out some of the liquid, but you're not going to be able to breathe out liquid from fully saturated areas of your lung. But the lymph vessels can generally carry fluid away.
And that's usually how it happens. When you do transplants, your immune system attacks it. Yeah, so I think, Stephen, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So, so when you do a transplant, typically your body will see some part of that transplant as not you. They try and make the match as good as possible, but it's never a true match unless you have an identical twin to donate something to you. So your body does see that, and then it will attack it. But then the doctors will give you certain medications to kind of tell your immune system to be more, they say, like tolerant. So it just kind of suppresses your immune system to a level that it won't reject the part that's not you. So it's kind of like a happy medium. But in the setting of like an infection, you would be very worried that when you suppress the immune system, it gets too far and then the infection would take over. So that's why you have to be very careful with transplant and infectious diseases.
And there's some fancy stuff these days trying to make it so patients don't have to be on immune suppressants for the rest of their lives. But right now, nearly all patients, except for bone marrow transplants, are on immune suppressants for the rest of their lives.
And that means that those people who have already had a transplant of some kind are more susceptible to COVID-19 because they are immunosuppressed actively.
One other way that some liquid can be removed is, this is not therapeutic, but sometimes we actually put fluid into the lungs and then take it back out. And we can use that to see what's in the lungs. So if we can kind of wash out the lung and then pull that fluid back out, and we can see what kind of microbes or viruses are in the lung, and that can help us figure out what kind of treatments to give these patients. All right. Seems like that's all we have on lungs today.
Out of questions.
Do you guys have questions about anything else? Does anyone have any like homework or anything they want to talk about? I don't think we have anything else planned.
Celeste has a question.
Oh, Celeste has a question? Nice.
Wait, what?
Did you not say you had a question?
No, I said I think we're out of questions.
Yeah.
If anyone needs help with homework or science homework or has questions on another science subject, then pretty much feel free to ask.
If you have suggestions for like the next session, 'cause I think we can make that more COVID targeted, or like go into more detail about like types of lung injury, other things that can happen to your lungs besides infection and smoking. So there's whole big categories like, say, asthma is kind of a respiratory related disease. Like, what can that do to your lungs? And okay, or career questions. We can answer those too.
What are you going to do with your MD PhD after graduation?
Frame it and put it on the wall.
Go to school again.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's the
He's
plan.
going to be a trophy husband, so.
I'm trying. It hasn't worked so well. I think in all serious. Oh, all right. Wow.
The
Okay.
chem question also.
You know how many moles? You need to know something else, like the mass of the compound that you have.
Yeah, or at least to know like the components of the chemical formula and the mass. I don't know if that helps.
Do you
answer.
have a particular homework problem? Like it's sometimes easier if you just just see the actual problem. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It has been a little while for chemistry, but we'll see how this goes. I see.
Okay. So, do you know how to calculate the mass of a compound?
Mhm.
Okay, for the chem question, do you know how to calculate the mass of a compound? Okay, so what you want to know. All right, so there are 0.434 moles. So you know exactly how many molecules you have. Actually, wait. You have 40, you have 46 grams of it, and that is equivalent to 0.434 moles. So, oh, okay.
Okay, so
So then what do you
what's the
need?
question again? Are you trying to figure out like, yeah, I think we're just a bit confused as to what question you're trying to answer. How would you find the formula units?
Because you have the compound, no?
Oh, the formula
Yeah.
units is like an ionic thing. So I think it's like the charge you would have to calculate from the moles.
But isn't the formula units already known?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
is
not
it
in the
Q
chemical
the charge
formula.
or the is NA is any?
Yeah, I guess I don't know.
Is that the full question? Do you mind typing that out?
okay.
Oh, I think it's
What? It's a formula unit.
I guess the amount of is it molecules? So it's like 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd formula units times moles.
Oh, like literally the number of molecules.
I'm not familiar with the formula unit term, but that's
know,
what
me
I've found
either.
so far.
I'm just confused by I think the subscripts are confusing because sodium has a charge of +1 and carbonate has a -2 charge. So you'd need 2 sodium to balance 1.
You have 2 sodium. It's
So it's
Na2.
Na2 with the subscript CO3.
Na2CO3, yeah.
I'm gonna guess it's the number of molecules.
The sample of sodium carbonate weighs 46 grams calculated.
Then you could just use Avogadro's number to say how many molecules of sodium carbonate you have. And then you can calculate directly from the moles. So that's the only information that you're missing.
For anyone who's going, I just did too. It's kind of just going over homework problems, questions, anything kind of.
Hey, Blanca, your mic is hard to hear.
Oh, yeah, I expected that. Anyone who I just admitted, just went over homework with 10 questions. So if you have any 10 or homework questions, feel free to ask.
Well, if a formula unit is equivalent to Avogadro's number, then that's why we're all confused.
Yeah, I think for the formula units, you just need to multiply the number of moles by Avogadro's number, and I think that's the answer.
Because it must be the number of individual molecules, which is somehow different. Okay.
Okay,
Do we want to do career questions?
we can do that.
Okay. So what are you guys doing after your MD, PhD, and do we have a lot of free time?
Do you want to start, Sage? Pain doc of the future.
Yeah. So I want to be a pain doctor, which means I want to treat chronic pain. So that's things that like basically everyone has, like low back pain, and then the really like TV worthy stuff like phantom limb pain, pain that lasts a certain amount of time without known injury is called neuropathic pain. And I will not bore you all with why that's so exciting to me, but it is.
Thanks.
And that's what I want to do. And I'm getting my PhD because I think that a lot of the reason that we treat pain poorly is that we have the wrong model currently for how pain works. So you may have heard of the opioid crisis. Before this, it was before COVID, it was on the news a lot. And a lot of the problem with the opioid epidemic is that a lot of the people who are taking lots of opioids are taking them because their doctors told them to take opioids because they're in pain. But for people with neuropathic pain, opioids actually don't treat their pain. So then they take more because it's not working, and then they develop an addiction. And so these two things are linked, and that's why I study both addiction and chronic pain. when I grow up, like I said, I want to treat it. And
When you grow up.
when I grow up, someday, when I graduate, and ideally work in translational and do treatment regimen studies. So not necessarily new drugs, but new combinations or combining things like required exercise and diet regimens with treatments to see if there's something out there that already exists that's better than highly addictive opioids. So that's what I want to do. And I currently have a lot of free time and I travel a lot until shelter in place.
Yeah, I think that you're traveling during med school. We may have talked about this a little bit last time, but your ability to travel during med school is generally there. But as we hit the PhD years, we have a little bit more flexibility than med school generally affords. I think the biggest problem with travel is that it can get expensive, but if you can afford it, then you can go. Also, if you're allowed to go. So right now, we're not allowed to travel much. But the other perk of the PhD is you may also be invited or apply to conferences, and these can be in different places. So you can go to other countries or other states and present your work and interact with other scientists who are interested in similar fields that you are, or you can just ignore them and go to Disney World or whatever floats your boat. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the field that you choose. Some fields tend to travel more than others. I work in radiology and have had a really, really fortunate ability to travel to other states and other countries to present my work. But some other fields may travel less. With regards to free time, I mean, during med school, during med school and PhD, you'll always be able to work more if you want to. And part of the job is learning how to not work all the time. And at different times, you'll be better at this than others. So working from home I've been working more, which is probably not the best, but you can balance that yourself. I think the PhD, especially, your boss is going to expect you to put in the effort that you expect. And they may try to push you along at certain times, but they're not going to babysit you for the most part. Unless you choose a boss that wants to babysit you, but I would advise against it.
That holds true no matter what you do with the rest of your life.
Yeah, so I think like when you get to med school, you're an adult and you're gonna be able to choose. Like if you want to take a week off class and go traveling, no one's gonna stop you. It may harm your grades or something like that, but no one's gonna stop you. So you're an adult and you'll be able to pick what you want to do, but you'll probably pick to work much of the time and take some sections of time off to travel or relax.
Celeste, Stephen, Mike.
What do I want to do? What I want to do is derm, but no, I'm just kidding. No, I think there's a common conception in medicine, and you'll hear all about it is if you go into pre-med and do medical school. But there's different tiers of medical specialties, and some of them are known as lifestyle specialties, and some of them have less cushy lifestyles. I probably will not be in a lifestyle specialty given my prior track record of choosing poor lifestyle decisions. But it's certainly, you can pick something that works for you. Right now I work in radiology, so there's a potential that I could be doing radiology in the future, but I haven't decided yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, same. I similarly haven't really decided. I do research in cancer biology, and there's a lot of cool like molecular biology and biochemistry going on in there, so I'd like to incorporate that in my career somehow. But in terms of specialty, right now, likely it would be something within internal medicine. So these would be like doctors that work in the hospital, or like you can even see them for primary care, depending on where you go for primary care. So yeah, and I'm also toying with the idea of going into industry and forming some sort of partnership between industry and clinical work. And this is like far into the nether future because like after we graduate, we do a residency training period, which is from like 3 to 5 years. I think we mentioned this last time, so I'm whipping through this. And then after residency, if you do internal medicine, you don't have to specialize. But if I wanted to do oncology, which is like I guess a cancer doctor, that's an additional 1 to 2 years of fellowship. So now we've added up like 6 years after graduating, and then I'd have to establish some sort of research career after that, and then go into industry. So like I'm really projecting out into like half of your lifetime. It's the point is it's very open ended, and that's kind of nice. You can like kind of decide as you go along.
I'm kind of the don't know category. A lot of people say that you kind of figure out what you want to do clinically in your 3rd year of medical school, which we all haven't gotten to yet. So I need to figure out if I want to do surgery, which I feel like I'll like a lot, but I don't know if I'll like the lifestyle again. So I guess once I've made that choice, I'll be able to choose better. But yeah, I guess I don't really know. And then eventually work maybe some translational research, but that's also way down in the road. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I answered first because everyone knows that I know exactly what I want to do, but I am definitely the minority. I think a lot of the people who go into the combined program, including me, go into it because we couldn't choose between medicine and a PhD.
That's not the right answer to give on the interview trail, though.
Don't tell people that, but that's the honest truth about this group. But I also my roommates are both regular medical students, so they are in their 3rd year right now. So, I mean, and they're happy and they're doing great. This one publishes more than me, so. But yeah.
Yeah, med school overall is a pretty good time. There's a lot of work, but I think all of us have enjoyed it. We've been here for, well, some of us longer than others, but I think Celeste and I are 6 years?
Oh God.
Are we starting our 6th year now? So I think we're both still,
Wow.
we're alive and kicking.
We started in 2015, right?
I don't know, Celeste, doesn't matter. 5, 6 years, whatever.
It's all faded into the distance.
I'm pretty sure I'm in my last year of my PhD starting now, so that would be my 6th year. So I think we're alive and kicking. We were probably more sarcastic than we were, a little bit more jaded than when we started. But I think it's a long path, and it's certainly a rewarding path, but it's a long path.
But you have to like the path. This is not the choice.
Don't be a doctor because your parents told you to.
And also don't go down any path of this length. Don't be a doctor, don't be a lawyer if you just want the end thing. You have to enjoy the middle part or you will burn out because it's really hard even when you want it.
Yeah, the middle part is the longest part. In many ways.
Not for everyone.
Like, you kind of just take it one day at a time. If we don't have any more questions, maybe we can ask you guys a question regarding like what you prefer in terms of content for next session. Because like we mentioned before, we can either go into more like different areas of lung injury, and maybe because Mike gave a really good overview of like lung physio, which is like normal pulmonary processes, but we can also go into more like lung pathology. We like briefly talked about like ventilators versus ECMO, and then like if we want, we can discuss more about like how that it can indicate different levels of lung injury. So like, say you have a problem with expansion of your lung, or you could have a problem of diffusion capacity, which indicates like, well, they both indicate tissue damage, but on different levels of the physiology. So
Biochemistry or biomedical engineering?
Biomedical engineering slides.
I'm definitely not making any biochemistry slides, but
I could do those.
I can do biochemistry. She's in that
Celestine.
department. I mean, I think we're happy. I mean, I'm a biomedical engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer by training before that. I'm happy to talk about engineering. I think we just want to make sure that there we go. Radiology. I like this. I'm happy to talk about radiology. I think, if we have suggestions about what to talk about, like biomedical engineering is an extremely, extremely diverse field. It's a new field and it hasn't existed long, and it just kind of swallowed up any aspect of engineering that had to do with biology. So there are some aspects of biomedical engineering I know nothing about, like tissue engineering, and some that I know a lot about, imaging. But I'm happy to talk about biomedical engineering in general. Like, what do biomedical engineers learn about? I don't know. Are some of you guys interested in applying to college as engineers? You should.
I agree.
Huh?
Engineers always say that.
Engineers tend to be happy in college because they're not as competitive as the pre-med majors. So you actually make friends instead of like being frenemies with everyone in your class. I'm just kidding.
Wait,
but,
that depends on the school.
if you go to
I
Cornell,
had friends
no one's
in my
friends. It's
major.
too
I
cold.
just didn't talk to any pre-med kids.
I thought Cornell engineering is a little rough.
Yes, neuroscience.
Yep.
Yes.
So maybe we can talk a little bit more about the fields that we're in.
Stephen. Sorry, Stephen hates neuro, but don't let that deter you.
Oh, yeah, I also am doing some research in neuroscience, so.
Because it's the best.
Oh, are you doing that sodium channel like gating stuff, Stephen?
No, Stephen studies the dawn of multicellularity.
Yeah.
That's true, but didn't you like have
I
like
mean, your research is pretty cool, Stephen. I don't usually
Yeah.
like biology, but
it's
I
like
don't,
a it's
I don't
like an
know what
action
Sage
potential
does
in a
except for play with
bacterial film?
little rodents, but have done. Do not want to do anymore. Yeah, but so we can talk maybe a little bit. Like, are you guys interested in hearing more about our particular research a little bit? Because that's something that we talk about all the time.
Oh, ouch! Have you folks managed to publish any research?
Yes. I think
Oh,
that's a touchy question, but I think
no, it's not. I'm just joking. But like a PhD graduation requirement is a publication.
It's the
as a
first author publication.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you
we
are
can
welcome to read them. They may be hard to obtain because they're generally located behind a firewall.
that's true. But some of my
I'm
papers.
happy to send out my most recent paper if people want to read it. It's not a scientific paper that I don't know if you guys have started reading them in bulk, but they don't tend to be page turners. They tend to be very dense and very, very specific to a certain field. I think
Yeah.
if
So I
we're
think
happy to
our
send you
job.
guys, maybe Blanca could forward it to you guys, but I think we can, they're
We
publicly
can
available.
download the PDFs, no?
Yeah, and we can we can definitely send out the papers, and also since we know the research, we can translate it into like non-jargon so people can actually understand.
Yeah, I mean, we
what
could
the
easily
project
do a
is.
quick presentation on some of our recent research or things that we're interested in. If you guys are interested in that, I think the PhD research tends to be a little bit different than kind of what we've just presented. So my presentation now is kind of a general overview of a topic, but PhDs tend to be very, very narrowly focused on specific topics and tend to assume some level of expertise in the audience. So yeah, if you can read the journals, that's fantastic. But certainly it's a skill that's developed, and in my own opinion, my own article that was recently published is not fun to read.
Yeah, none of these are page turners.
Yeah, they tend to be very dry, but we're happy to send them out if you want to read them. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, sure.
So for the next session, I think we can even start like, I guess Mike, because he went this time, and next week I won't be able to make it because I have a committee meeting. But maybe Sage or Stephen can introduce your research.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Perfect.
Do we want to talk about
Yeah.
COVID next time or wait too? I mean, I don't care. Do you guys want to hear
Yeah,
more about
I
COVID next
don't
time,
care.
or do you want to wait 2 weeks?
When will wave 2 come?
Hopefully
We
never.
can.
Really?
Wave one has to end first. Unfortunately, we don't know.
And will school be closed because of it? Probably.
I think school is going to be a
We're in
lot
Illinois.
different for the next year.
I think it might. Illinois seems to be one of these states that's going to try to be more cautious, which is good in terms of mortality rates in our state, but it means that you should probably buckle up for a lot of virtual schooling for a long time.
Yeah, and if you guys have other things that you want us to talk about, like again, none of us have done chemistry in a little while, but if you want to have a breakout room where we can talk about chemistry with a couple of you or something like that, we're happy to do that too. It may rely on us doing a little bit of Googling to refresh our memory. I haven't taken chemistry since 2008 or 2009. So it's just a little bit, we do know a lot of the science, but it just takes a little bit of a refresher for some of it. So if you guys are interested in that, let us know. But we're happy to send out a couple of papers. Maybe we can talk about Sage or Stephen's research next time.
Yeah, we can alternate with like this, the as module content, and then more like career related stuff.
Sure.
Your chill schedule.
Yeah, we don't want to just be lecturing to you guys for an hour and a half. Like, we think you guys probably have enough lecture with school that you don't need to. I mean, I do like listening to myself talk, but you guys might not enjoy it as much as me. So,
No way.
what?
Kidding.
Ouch. Well, next time it won't be me talking, so that's good. I agree. I think that the applying to college this fall, I think, is going to be a challenge. I mean, I've been talking, I have some cousins as well that are your guys' age. There's some feeling that college, if you can afford to go this year, might be easier to get into, but also that if you can't and you put it off a year, it might make it really difficult because there's going to be a lot more applicants, assuming things get better in the next year and a half. And I think there's a large conception that there's no reason to go to college right now. Maybe not no reason, but it's less appealing to go to college and pay whatever enormous sum that colleges are charging these days if all of your classes are going to be online from home anyway. And I don't see colleges offering a discount. I could be a pessimist, but I don't think that's going to happen. So yeah, I think if you guys want to talk more about college too, I mean, we've all done college. I think most of us have read tens to dozens, I mean, a lot of applications for college and med school and beyond. So if you want to talk about that kind of stuff, we can talk about that as well. I know it's a stressful time, especially, and it's stressful normally, and now we have even additional stress from the virus going around.
Yes.
Good question.
One of my roommates is HPME.
You might want to explain the program though.
Okay, so the HPME program is a program where you get pre-accepted to medical school. And so the benefit of the program is that you know you're going to go to medical school and you don't have to take the MCAT. The downside of the program is that you don't really have a major in undergrad. It's a shortened undergrad. Oh, yeah, so that's the second upside. You graduate earlier. But it's a shortened undergrad, and so you don't actually have an undergrad major. You basically major in pre-med, and then you go right on to medical school. And we can talk a little bit about it. I personally, I will let our other panelists speak to their experience, but I personally would recommend that even if you know that that's what you want to do, that you try other things and take your time. And the reason that I recommend that is that, first of all, most med schools in the country are moving towards preferentially accepting people who have taken time off school and done something else. And part of that is that being out of school for a little bit gives you a little bit of a different perspective, and it makes you a little bit more resilient when you come back to med school. And secondly, I loved my undergraduate. I studied neuroscience at undergrad. I loved it, and what is that?
I don't know.
This is similar.
I think it's similar to
Yeah.
HPME, but it's like you apply while you're in college. So you apply a little earlier if you're a Northwestern student.
HPME, you
Oh,
apply
because
for high
Northwestern
school
has all these
university.
fast track things.
Yeah, so it's another fast track. I think the benefit, like, yeah, it's a personal decision.
Yeah. So if you're really itching to be a doctor today, then sure. But in general, I think don't discount life experience and don't discount really investing time in other things that you're interested in or care about, like an actual undergrad major, or like just having time in undergrad to do other things. I'm very pro gap year. I took a gap year. Do you think Northwestern will drop the SAT, ACT exam requirements?
No.
Probably not.
I think that the way that the SAT, ACT requirements work is probably similar to how the MCAT requirements work and how the even the STEP requirements work in medical school. And those are changing. I think in general, the ACT, SAT is used as a benchmark to say, do you have a high enough score to come to our school? And if you have like a super high score, then they're impressed. But if you have over their cutoff, then they're happy. And if you do really poorly, that would hurt your chances of getting in. And I can also play a little bit of devil's advocate on Sage advocating taking a full college experience. Though in my defense, I will say that I took 5 years as an undergraduate, did a master's degree, took a year off, and then came to medical school. So I'm probably not the best devil's advocate, but I work with a lot of students that are foreign medical graduates. And in a lot of other countries, they don't even go to college. They go straight to medical school and have a 5-year medical school. And working with a lot of people like this, they're totally fine doctors. They're great doctors. And especially now, money is going to be tight. So if there's certainly the financial considerations can play into this, and these fast track can be a lucrative option. I think if you're like my old roommate in college was 100% sure he was going to be a doctor. There was no possible way that he was not going to be a doctor. If you're that kind of person, this path can be great for you. If you have any doubt in your mind, take your time and learn what you like. BSMD. Yeah, I think that, and this is certainly something I've been thinking about. If you want to do it because it's shorter, especially if you're trying MD PhD, most of the HPME do not do MD PhD. I don't know of any.
No, you cannot do MD PhD directly from HPME. You would have to be an internal applicant to the MSCP program once you're in medical school. But it would be pretty hard to get in because HPME, because it's fast track, does not exactly leave enough time for the research requirements to get into the combined program.
Correct. It would be challenging.
However, the answer to the end of your question is yes. I'm going to graduate when I'm 32. And then I will have 4 years of residency and 1 year of fellowship and 1 year of research.
And I will graduate when I'm 34. and we'll probably have 6 years of residency approximately. So I'll start my career when I'm 40, and that's something you certainly will think about. Even going a normal MD, you may not want to. You may not want to wait until you're 35 and you may not be able to afford to wait until you're 35 to have a job. I mean, the MD PhD we're paid. None of us are making none of us are like doing shady stock market deals on the side or anything like that. But we're all alive and have enough money to live with. I think
for the BSMD, if you're interested in research, that doesn't necessarily mean you need a PhD. In fact, the most common question that you get when you're interviewing for this program is, why do you need a PhD? Why can't you just be a doctor that does research? So there's more than one path to achieve what you want to achieve or do what you want to do.
that's true.
PhD receive more money. Yeah.
PhDs receive more funding. MDs get paid more. You can choose which one you like more, or you can do an MD PhD and do both. I think also if you want to do a biomedical engineering degree, not to be a downer on engineering, but engineering tends to take longer than pre-med majors. My roommate in college, as I said, was basically a pre-med major at UCLA, and I think he had 11 upper division courses required. As a mechanical engineer at UCLA, I had 23, I think. So the course load is much heavier in engineering. So I think that that's something to think about. You may have a more challenging job, and it may not be open to you to do a fast track engineering degree. There's just too many requirements that you have to take. If you want to have a major and a minor, I would say major and minor, go for it. Minors tend to not have as much value as majors. Mm-hmm. But if you want to have a minor, it's totally a valid thing to do.
My sister's a CNA, and it's definitely immersive experience, I guess I would say. It is the kind of grunt work that even medical students will not typically have done. However, I was an EMT in undergrad, and I found it really useful. It was a good way for me to check that I really wanted to do medicine. So, I mean, if you want to be a CNA, be a CNA. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's something that we probably don't focus on enough because we're all in the MD track. But certainly we know a lot of people who are nurses and other medical professionals, and I think highly valuable. Some of them have shorter training requirements, and some of them the job is just different. So certainly I think we all respect a huge variety of clinical practitioners. I mean, I was also an EMT in college. I think it's a fantastic way to decide whether you like the kind of hands-on medicine that you might have to experience. But certainly don't limit yourself to thinking of being a doctor. There's tons of other medical professionals, physical therapists, nursing, all kinds of stuff. So I think we can talk about these things.
Like in the future? Is that question as the topic for the future?
I think so. I think we can talk about those things. Yeah. We're not certified to certify you in those things.
Definitely not. But at least like an intro into like.
Yeah, we can tell you about what those things are. Sure.
Yeah, and like even go into the spectrum of healthcare careers, because we didn't really talk about like PAs and like we're definitely not experts on these fields, but like just as a general intro to
give you guys a little bit more of a broad view of what kind of careers are available in healthcare.
Are you guys interested in varied healthcare careers or things that you could do as healthcare jobs between now and becoming a doctor? If anyone has thoughts. Because, you know, we can also talk about like you can get a phlebotomy certification as young as 18, and do things like that. So that would be taking blood and giving injections in like more of a clinical lab setting. So like when you go to the doctor and you get your blood drawn, some of those people are nurses, but some of those people are phlebotomists, and that's just what they do. Things like that. Pharmacy jobs are accessible to young people, and they don't have to be your entire career. But then things like PAs, so physician's assistants and nurse practitioners, those are whole other career options that are also really interesting and cool. So can be very competitive. So if anyone has an opinion on which of those you're interested in, let us know.
Yeah, and certainly some of these classes like ACLS, PALS, and PAIRS, they can be super interesting, especially if you're interested in medical school or other healthcare providership. I think a lot of us had some of these certifications before getting to medical school, and some of them really feel empowering to have if you know how to do CPR, if you know how to take care of people in a kind of acute settings or college.
Yeah, I think it could definitely help, but I wouldn't say they're like absolutely necessary.
No, not
For
necessarily, but some of them are
myself,
nice
like
to have.
I didn't do any of this in college, but it's definitely good to think about.
What college did you go to for undergrad, Celeste?
I went to Cornell for undergrad. I can talk more about that if you're interested.
It's a sad
A
place,
very
lots of
isolated
snow.
school.
I was at UCLA.
I was
Okay.
at NYU.
I went to Calvin College, or university now, I guess.
Oh.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah, so anything else you guys want to talk about next time? Thanks for the suggestions this time. Yeah, we can talk more about specific career stuff next time too. I think it's 5:30 now, so we'll let you guys go. But thanks for joining in. And we can talk more about this next time. We'll hear a little bit about either Sage or Steven's research, and we can talk about some more career path things or anything else you guys want to next time as well. If you have any other suggestions that you want to talk about before and you think about them before next week, feel free to email Blanca and she'll forward them to us. And we may not get to it next week, but we can certainly cover things that you guys are interested in. I mean, our goal is not to bore you. We want to make sure that we're spending our time giving you guys things that are exciting and interesting to you. So yeah, tell us what do you want to hear about.